He explains, quotes the Midrash, Torah Kohanim and the Midrash, why was Kedoshim to you that you must be holy said in the presence of Kol Adas B'nai Yisrael? So Rashi explains, because the majority of the fundamentals of the Torah depend on this principle of Kedoshim to you. What does that mean? As we explained yesterday, what is the basis of observing the Torah? We explained in the name of Rav Chaim Vital yesterday that the Taryag Mitzvos, the 248 positive commandments, each one of them corresponds to one component of the neshama, of the soul, and it spiritualizes that component. The objective is ultimately to create a dimension of perfection within the soul, that the soul has been spiritualized through the mitzvos, and only God knows how to spiritualize the soul, because only He knows and understands the makeup of the soul or what the soul needs to spiritualize it. So the mitzvos were given specifically for that purpose. But ultimately, what's the purpose? It's Olam Haba, is the world to come. And as we explained, the world to come is having a relation with God. Being in a position to have a capacity due to one's own degree and dimension of spiritual advancement, we're able to actually have a relationship with God Himself. So the objective of mitzvos, the objective of serving God in this world and every challenge, in every aspect of that challenge, is to create a commonality with God to be able to have that relationship. So therefore, when you put on tefillin, it's not just putting on tefillin to put on tefillin, and eating kosher, to eat kosher. Every one of them is directly related because it is the basis for the relationship. So if God Himself is kadosh, He's totally removed from physicality, He's totally spiritual. Therefore, we ourselves, whether you learn like Rashi, that kadosh means remove yourself from forbidden behavior, sexual relations, or the way the Ramban explains, wean yourself from material, from physicality, and even something that's permitted, if you're at a point that you're able to remove yourself from that, you should, to create this commonality, then you actually are advanced to a level to be more worthy to be able to cleave to God and be exposed to His radiance. That's the understanding. If that's the case, Rovu fi Torah Tluyimba. So therefore, the basis for the mitzvos is to establish, to achieve that objective. That's therefore everything. The fundamental principle is Kedoshim Tiyu, because the objective is to arrive and develop and advance to that point that we should have the greatest level of commonality with Hashem to be able to cleave to Him. Even in this world, as physical beings, there's a mitzvah of Atem Adveikim Hashem Elokeichem Chaim Kulchem Hayom. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Atem Adveikim Hashem Elokeichem. You must cleave to Hashem Elokeichem and then Chaim Kulchem Hayom. Then you'd be Chai Kulchem Hayom. There's a positive commandment of Botidbuk. You must cleave to Him. So the Gemara asks, how do you cleave to Him? You can't cleave to fire. So the Gemara answers, by being associated with Talmidei Chachamim. Even if one does not study Torah himself, having a relation with Talmidei Chachamim, marrying their daughters, supporting them, giving them opportunities, providing food and drink for them, that is Botidbuk. You're attaching yourself to Hashem, because through them, they are God's representatives in this world. So Botidbuk, even in this world, to be able to achieve the ultimate level and be impacted, to be spiritualized, the challenge in this world, you should associate yourself and attach yourself to Talmidei Chachamim or anything that has to do with the Talmud Chacham, with the Torah sage himself. The Chofetz Chaim writes that as we learn regarding the laws of Shabbos, there's such a thing as a Kli Rishon, Kli Sheni, Kli Shlishi. That if you have a vessel that's on the fire and it reaches a certain temperature, that vessel even when you remove it from the fire, if it retains a certain degree of heat as a result of the being in contact with the fire, you're able to cook in that vessel. Of course, it's referred to as Kli Rishon. It's the first vessel, it was the vessel that it was associated with the fire. What about if you take whatever the liquid in that vessel and you transfer it to a second vessel, and the second vessel was not associated with the fire? That vessel, it's not so simple with cooks. Because the moment, as Tosas explains in Shabbos, you transfer it from the first vessel to the second vessel, since the walls of the second vessel were never associated with fire, the moment you put it into that second vessel, which is cold, it causes the temperature to drop. And since it's falling temperature, it's not a constant temperature, it does not have the ability to cook. When you transfer it to a Kli Shlishi, to a third vessel, again, it's going to a vessel that was not associated with fire. Again, it's being affected by the cold walls of the second vessel, which was never associated with a fire. Then it drops at another rate, and under no circumstance does it cook whatsoever. So the Chofetz Chaim explains, the Gemara tells us, based on the Pasuk in Novi, what is the Torah itself? Kol dvarei ke'esh Hashem. Hashem says the words of the Torah are like fire themselves. So the Talmud Chacham, who studies the Torah, and he's the Torah sage, he is the fire itself. He is the fire. The one who's exposed to him and has a relationship with him, he is the Kli, he is the vessel that's associated with the fire. But what happens with the Kli Rishon? Even the first vessel, it was on the fire and it's piping hot. And you remove it, and now, due to the lapse of time of the disassociation, it drops to a point where it's less than Yatsul Edesbo. It's less than the temperature, which is considered hot. It's no longer a Kli Rishon. Even though initially that vessel was hot and that heat had the ability to cook, because it retains the heat that it absorbed from the fire. But if you leave that vessel off long enough, it's classified as a cold vessel. And even if you put something there, it will not cook. It would become tepid now. It would not cook. It says the same thing with a person. If a person who's not a Talmud Chacham himself, but he has a relation with a Talmud Chacham and he's exposed to that Talmud Chacham, that Talmud Chacham, being the fire itself, will warm that person, heat the person, that he will ignite him, that he'll be able to perform at a certain level. But if there's a lapse of time where there's a disassociation between that person and the Talmud Chacham, it's like the Kli Rishon, the first vessel being removed from the fire, and if the time is long enough, it cools down. The person cools down. And the person no longer has the spark to be able, or the enthusiasm, to be able to be motivated to do the mitzvah. So therefore he says, the Talmud Chacham himself, who possesses the fire, because Kol dvarei ke'esh Hashem, because the words of the Torah are the fire themselves, he has the fire in the belly. But the person who doesn't have the fire in the belly, because he doesn't have that Torah knowledge, and he's not involved in the study of Torah, there it's only due to association. So as long as the association is recent and continuous, then you have that heat, then you have that enthusiasm, then you're continuously touched. But once you disassociate, you detach yourself, ultimately it totally fades and becomes less noticeable, and automatically the person cools down totally. So the Kedoshim Tiyu itself is what, especially the ultimate is if you're involved in the process itself. But even if you're not involved in the process, not everybody's able to become the Talmud Chacham, but if you can't, through association with the Talmud Chacham, as it says, Botidbok, assisting the Torah sage to earn a living, marrying his daughter, providing food and drink for the Talmud Chacham, attending to his personal needs, that will actually impact on you. There's a Ramchal, phenomenal Ramchal. The Ramchal writes in the Das Tfunos, it's one of his works, The Knowing Heart, that a person based on his achievement in this world can accomplish phenomenal things. But if a person himself is a beneficiary of the material in this world due to his mitzvahs, that actually reduces his level of worthiness in the world to come. Because part of the payoff was in this world. That's a depletion of his merit in the world to come. So he says initially you could have a person in the world to come, he would have been considered a rosh, a leader, in a leadership position. But because he took an early retirement and he took some of that payment in this world, now when he arrives in the world to come, he's no longer in the leadership position. Because he took early retirement in this world. But a person who doesn't withdraw early in this world, and he leaves all intact for the world to come, and he achieved that special level of achievement, he's a rosh, he's a leader in the world to come. Okay? Therefore, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says that since we never know when we receive anything material in this world, positive, we never know if it's a payoff or it's what we call the Yusufrucht. We don't know. So he says, we always hedge our bets and you always play it safe. So whatever you receive in this world, reinvest for the sake of God, so it should never be considered a depletion. It should never be considered a withdrawal of your principle, and therefore you will always remain in the position that you deserve that initially you were at. That's Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So the Ramchal writes, what about a person who's in a secondary position? He was never worthy of being a leader in the world to come. But his participation in the person who's that special spiritual person, he's essential to that person's life. He provides many amenities. He assists him. He says, even though in his own right he's not worthy of being in a leadership position, but because the leader's position is dependent upon this other person's assistance, who's a lesser person, that lesser person rises to the level of the more advanced person, and in the world to come, he's valued as a leader, not as a secondary person or a third level person. That's the Ramchal. Because again, it's due to dissociation.